thing about it, a king don't chase a peasant. King chase kings. I want Joshua.
Down to right forever winning. What up? Let's go, baby! Let's go!
Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news!
One king of the heavyweight division, and we know for you to do that, you need to beat and fight the other man, the other champion, who holds 3 of the other belts in Anthony Joshua.
I've done all I could do.
Except sign the contract, which would have effectively made the fight.
That everybody I fight, people already discredit. Look at Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz, the best, one of the best. One of the best. But people still, man, this dude failed drug tests and I still gave him the opportunity.
For the most part, I myself am not discrediting Luis Ortiz as a quality scalp. I've said many times that Luis Ortiz is a quality scalp, an elite level opponent, and a dangerous opponent. I gave Deontay Wilder full credit for taking on that fight when he really didn't have to. But there is such a thing as blowing it out of proportion. There is such a thing as inflating Luis Ortiz as being number 2 in the division when we all know that's not true. Whether you're talking about Transnational, BoxRec, ESPN, or Ring Magazine, Luis Ortiz was never and has not ever been the number 2 guy in the weight class. And Deontay Wilder's problem is that, well, you've got 40 professional fights, and this is the best guy you fought. There have been quality guys floating around for years, whereas you've only fought 1. So he's not being discredited, rather, it's being blown out of proportion. And you, sir, have 40 professional fights. So in 40 fights, you should have more to brag about than just him.
They wonder why ain't no other champion calling him out, dog. No other top contender trying to fight him because they don't want to lose their spot. And that's real talk.
Now that much is true. There ain't a lot of people in any kind of hurry to fight Luis Ortiz. They ain't. Nope. Top contenders, those guys don't want to take a chance on him. Now, I mean, at least that bit of it is true. But when it comes to the champions, it's up to Luis Ortiz to line himself up for a champion, you know. It's up to him to do that. He's got to get himself in line for that. Because aside from a name that the hardcores recognize, he really doesn't have anything that anybody wants. No belts and no marquee value.
Sorry.
They can go around talking about, they can go around all day talking about he old, but they don't want to fight him. That don't make no sense. If he's so old, then she'd fight him.
And once again, there I agree with Deontay Wilder. When it comes to the contenders, when it comes to those guys that are, you know, trying to climb the top 10 divisional rankings or the alphabet rankings, when it comes to the contenders, those guys, those are the guys that really should be targeting Luis Ortiz. Those are the guys who should be looking to make a name for themselves by fighting and defeating Luis Ortiz.
They should be.
But I reiterate, I myself am not discrediting Luis Ortiz as an opponent. I just don't have any illusions about him or what's on his resume or who he is to the division. He's an elite level fighter. That cannot be denied.
And it's not.
But with 40 pro fights, you should have more names to brag about than just his. I do agree, though. Don't discredit Luis Ortiz as an opponent if you're not willing to fight him yourself. I agree with that. And it shouldn't go unnoticed that, no, maybe Luis Ortiz isn't number 2, but he certainly is in the top 10. So don't discredit him as an opponent.
Calling him an old man.
Unless you're willing to take him on yourself.
Didn't you feel like, I'll take it, I'll beat him, I'll knock him out, and then I'll get the reverse in the rematch? Did that ever go through?
The thing about it, they never agreed to the rematch. They didn't even want a rematch clause. It was one-sided. The rematch clause said that
even if you won.
The rematch clause said that if Deontay Wilder wins, you know, there ain't no option of no rematch. But if Joshua wins, he get a rematch. You feel me? How is that? How does that work? 2 champions putting their belts on the line. If one win, no rematch. But if the other one win, he gets a rematch. Well, you know what I'm saying? What is that?
What do you mean? What is that? I'll tell you what that is. He's the A side and you're not. That's what that is. If that's your question, what is that? He's the A side and you're the B side. He's got more marquee value than you do, thus
he's in charge.
He's the guy in a power position. If you're so stuck on a rematch, you know, I don't understand how you're so sure that Anthony Joshua was afraid of you and you went as far as calling him a coward. But then why are you the guy that's
stuck on a rematch clause?
so hung up on a rematch clause that you don't sign the contract? If you're so sure you're going to beat him, then what are you worried about a rematch clause for? You're not going to need it. That is, if you're really sure that you can beat him. But you must not be sure if you're willing to forego negotiations altogether because he's got a rematch clause and you don't. I guess you're not as sure of yourself as you let on if you skip the fight altogether just because you can't get a rematch clause. What are you worried? You're going to lose?
But you don't see me mad.
We're about to get this thing going on, baby. We're about to see who's the biggest and the baddest in the world. One champion, one face, one name. Something you was a coward to do in your own country.
No,
well, if he's right here, if he was right there, you tell him to look at this one. I'm looking at you right here. You was a coward. You was a coward. And you know this. Your whole team know this. Each and every last one of you said different things over and over. You manipulate. You contradict.
But you don't see me mad.
Deontay Wilder might claim that he's not mad, but his actions tell another story. His actions month by month, week by week, and even now tell the story of a man who is very much upset. And what's he upset about? He's upset that he couldn't have it his way. He's upset that he doesn't want to acquiesce to being the B-side to Anthony Joshua, but right now, that's what the fuck he is, like it or not. And rather than acquiesce to being the B-side so that the big fight can get made, he's chosen to go another direction. Rather than just, you know what, fuck it, I'm the B-side, I'll be that because I know I can beat you. Really? Rather than going about it that way, he's chosen to raise his marquee value, raise his profile by fighting someone else. The question is that a good move? Is that a move that he could benefit from? Yes, it is. It is. Look, regardless of what you think of Tyson Fury, whether you think he's ready or he's not ready, regardless of any of that, if Wilder wins that fight, which a lot of people are favoring him to win for reasons that we've talked about many times on this channel, so we're not going to talk about him right here.
All right.
But if Wilder wins that fight, you know, one, that'll be his first pay-per-view. So, you know, that's a good thing.
Provided it sells.
And the guy that he's fighting just so happens to be the lineal heavyweight champion, a guy who is also a well-known fighter in the division and in Anthony Joshua's backyard. It's a winnable fight for Deontay Wilder, so in that way, it is a good move. However, the full success of that move, the full success, this is the whole picture. The full success of that move hinges on just how well the pay-per-view does. Because it's not enough that, okay, you're participating in a pay-per-view, because Anthony Joshua's participated in quite a few of those. And no, they weren't in the American market, they were over there in the UK, but do understand that the money that he's made over there in the UK by far super exceeds anything that Deontay Wilder's done here in America. That's why he's the A-side. But anyway, back to the point.
Wilder's still mad.
It's a pay-per-view. And good, you're having a pay-per-view fight against a guy who's known in some circles. Okay, good, very good. The thing is, it's not enough to just have the pay-per-view. The pay-per-view has to be a success. The pay-per-view has to sell. It has to do good numbers. Otherwise, it might actually be a banana peel if it doesn't do good. Because then they'll say, well, look at this guy's marquee value. Look at what he's asking for, and look at what he's sold.
Fuck out of here.
Okay, what you're saying you want doesn't match up with your pay-per-view numbers. So until it happens, you can fuck right off with your demands. That's essentially the situation. Now, the pay-per-view, it might, you know, maybe it does okay. Maybe somewhere in the realm of 350K. Maybe, you know, you never know. You can be optimistic. It's just that in America's pay-per-view market, it is hard to get people to buy a fight. Let's call a spade a spade. It's hard to get people to go into their wallets and buy a fight. Remember, the Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin rematch, that did less numbers than it did last year. And that had more build-up than the first fight. Yet it did less numbers.
Think about that.
So when you look at Wilder, who's not a pay-per-view fighter, and Tyson Fury, who's also not a pay-per-view fighter, here in America, both here in America, you can see how there might be challenges. That maybe the pay-per-view does okay, but it doesn't do so well that you can go up to these guys and think, hey, look, I was in a pay-per-view, give me 50%. No, it doesn't work like that. Essentially, the challenges that the Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury pay-per-view face, that's if the fight actually comes off. Some people are very skeptical about that. But supposing the fight goes through, they have the fight, the challenges then become, well, how well in today's pay-per-view market, how well does the fight do when, one, it's already hard to get people to buy a fight, but two, you've got illegal streams. to compete with. Facebook streams, Instagram streams, pirating sites, Fire Sticks. It's very hard to sell a pay-per-view these days. Much harder than it's ever been in recent memory. So those are the challenges that the fight itself faces. That's if the fight actually comes off. That there are still challenges to be addressed there. Thus, just the act of having a pay-per-view doesn't put you on the level with Anthony Joshua. The pay-per-view has to actually do well, and that in and of itself is a challenge. So when Deontay Wilder says, they want to do their own thing, and he's really not mad, I hate to say it, but it sounds like a lot of bullshit. No, you are mad, because you know that Anthony Joshua is guaranteed money, and this situation here, it really isn't guaranteed money.
It's not.
Not if you're relying on the American market to be the ones to carry this pay-per-view. Now, in other news, IBF Super Featherweight Champion Maiva Hamadouche will be returning to the ring on the 11th of November against Iron Lady Helen Joseph. A puncher with a sizable punch.
She can hit.
Decent KO percentage. Good amount of knockouts. She's got a professional record of 15 wins, 3 losses, with 2 draws and 10 knockouts.
All right.
Things you want to know about Helen Joseph is she does appear to have a problem with boxers who can move and punch. Boxers like Diana Santana, who's going to be squaring off against Chantel Cameron very soon. Diana Santana won a decision over Helen Joseph. Just as well, IBF champion in another division, Jennifer Hahn, also dispensed a loss to Helen Joseph. Now, what you want to realize here is that, Maiva Hamadouche is a great fighter, no doubt about it, so don't look past her. But Maiva Hamadouche is not the same kind of fighter that those fighters are. You understand? Maiva Hamadouche herself is a puncher. She's a banger. She's a pressure fighter. She's an aggressive, come forward kind of fighter. So in spite of Helen Joseph losing those fights to those fighters, do realize that styles make fights. So it's a different dynamic entirely when you've got a fighter that's going to be moving laterally and fighting on the go, as opposed to a fighter that is more likely to bring the fight to you.
Maiva.
Essentially, this fight between Maiva Hamadouche and Helen Joseph, it could be fireworks. It could be a bit of a barn burner because they're both punchers. And, with these things in mind, I would not categorize this fight as a keep busy fight. This isn't a fight against an opportunistic opponent who's coming off of several losses, losing record or something like that. This really isn't a showcase fight. It doesn't read like a showcase fight. So it is in some ways a keep busy fight, but it's not a walk in the park. It's not a showcase fight. Now, we do know that Maiva Hamadouche was calling out the other champions in the division. More particular, she was calling out WBA champion Hyun Mi Choi. No word on if, there's actually been any progress with that. Has there been any progress to make a unification fight between the French IBF champion, Maiva Hamadouche, and the South Korean champion, Hyun Mi Choi? We don't know what's going on with that, if there's anything going on with that at all. But for now, just heads up, on November 11th, Maiva Hamadouche will be defending her IBF Super Featherweight title against Helen Joseph, and the fight could actually be a very entertaining, aesthetically pleasing fight to watch. Now, get a load of this bullshit. Richard Schaefer says the fans want to see Errol Spence versus Mikey Garcia.
They do?
Not Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford.
The fuck?
He talked about how the Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence pay-per-view fight, he talked about how this fight will likely take place in the first quarter of next year. How people are always talking to him and asking him about that fight, and virtually no one asks him about the Terrence Crawford-Errol Spence fight.
Bullshit.
He mentioned that, Crawford's been fighting in divisions that aren't very popular. He's not very well known amongst the casual fans, and Bob Arum can keep him and Lomachenko very busy. He was quoted as saying that on the PBC side of things, there are so many great welterweight fights that can happen, and it doesn't really matter. His words. It doesn't really matter if Terrence Crawford is a part of that. Now, if you fans out there, whether you're Errol Spence fans or you're Terrence Crawford fans, you have got to hold Richard Schaefer accountable for the words that come out of his mouth, because essentially he's telling you that you don't want to see that fight, that you'd rather watch Errol Spence fight a fucking guy who's basically really just a 135-pounder. The same shit that you criticized Triple G for, fighting a guy from 2 divisions south.
Remember?
The same kind of shit that Canelo's critics criticized him for, fighting a guy from 2 divisions south.
Remember?
He's telling you that you want to see Errol Spence fight a guy who's really from 135 more than you want to see him fight a guy in his own fucking weight class.
That's bullshit.
He's telling you guys what you want to see.
That's bullshit.
You want my opinion? I don't really want to see a Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence fight. What I want to see is a Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence fight. I'm not captivated or intrigued at the prospect of Mikey Garcia going up to 147, having done nothing there so far. I'm not intrigued at the prospect of him going up there, biting off more than he can chew, and effectively
ruining
quite possibly and honestly,
career.
Ruining his career. He could be damaged goods after a fight like that. That's not intriguing to me. What's intriguing to me is 2 champions in the same weight class putting it all on the line against each other, because they're both viewed by different factions of fans as the best in show. Whereas Mikey Garcia's got good fights right there at 135 pounds, and it seems like you guys are all but ready to feed him to Errol Spence. Why, to build his buzz or something? Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence is the fight I want to see. I don't know who the fuck Richard Schaefer's been talking to, but he ain't been talking to me. The fight I want to see is Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence.
He's the fighting pride of Omaha, Nebraska, USA. The reigning, defending, undefeated WBO champion of the world, Terrence
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the reigning, the defending, and the undefeated IBF welterweight champion of the world, introducing the true Errol Spence Jr.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
And you're telling me you don't want to see that? Yeah, fucking right.